Downtown Charleston, South Carolina. A busy intersection buzzed with honking cars, bus brakes screeching, and people rushing with coffee cups in hand. The sidewalks overflowed with workers in suits, students in backpacks, and tourists snapping photos. And there she stood, an elderly white woman, frail and hunched over a cane. Her hair was silver, her coat worn, her hands trembling as she tried to step off the curb. Each time she inched forward, the traffic light changed, cars surged past, and she froze again. Dozens of people walked by without so much as a glance. Some sidestepped her, some frowned with irritation. Others just pretended she wasn't there at all. She was invisible. This wasn't just one moment. It was a reflection of a deeper truth. The city was fast, self-absorbed, and often cruel to those who didn't fit into its rhythm. The old woman's lips moved, as if whispering to herself. Her eyes darted left and right, searching for someone, anyone, to help her across. But instead, people muttered things under their breath. She's holding up the sidewalk. Why doesn't she just call her family? Somebody else will deal with it. It was a familiar cruelty. A cruelty born not out of hatred, but out of selfishness. The kind that wounds just as deeply as opens scorn. That's when Coulter appeared, 16 years old. A tall, lanky black kid with scuffed sneakers, a faded hoodie, and headphones slung around his neck. He had just finished his part-time shift at a corner store and was heading home, his backpack slapping against his shoulders with each step. Unlike everyone else, he noticed. He saw her trembling hands. He saw her struggling against the rush of the world that had no time for weakness. He saw the fear in her eyes. Fear of falling, fear of being left behind. And without hesitation, he stopped. As Coulter approached her, the crowd noticed. People slowed down, their eyes narrowing. Whispers spread like sparks in dry grass. Look at that kid. What's he doing? Hope he's not bothering her. You know how those kids are. The racism was subtle, but sharp. The assumption wasn't that Jamal was helping. It was that he was a threat. A few even pulled out their phones, as if ready to catch trouble unfolding. But Coulter ignored them. He bent down slightly, his voice soft, his tone respectful. The gesture spoke volumes. He offered his hand, not demanding, not rushing, just offering. The woman hesitated, her blue eyes locked on his brown ones. For a moment, there was silence, and then she placed her frail hand in his. Step by step, they moved together across the wide, busy street. Coulter kept his pace slow, steady, his body positioned slightly ahead of hers, shielding her from the impatient crowd and the swerving cars that edged too close. The traffic light turned green halfway, but Coulter raised his free hand firmly, daring the drivers to wait. And surprisingly, they did. The crowd watched, their whispers fading into a hush. When they finally reached the other side, the old woman clutched his hand tighter, as though she knew this moment was more than just about crossing a street. It was about being seen, about being valued. The bystanders looked uncomfortable. Some shifted guiltily, realizing they had walked past her minutes earlier. Others muttered excuses under their breath. But a few? They smirked. Bet he just wants attention. Probably asking her for money after. You can take the kid out the street, but you can't take the street out the kid. The racism lingered, sour in the air. But Coulter didn't care. He gave her a gentle nod, then turned to continue his walk home, his backpack swaying with each step. The old woman stood at the corner, watching him go, tears glistening in her eyes, because in that moment, the world had ignored her. But one young black teen hadn't. Even after Calter walked away, the sidewalk buzzed. Some people muttered to each other about how surprising it was to see a kid like that help. Others shook their heads, still clutching stereotypes. One man in a suit leaned over to his co-worker. "Funny. Thought he was about to snatch her purse." His co-worker shrugged. "They always got an angle. Just wait." Those words hung in the air. The same tired narrative. Black youth couldn't be trusted. Their kindness couldn't be real. To them, Calter's act wasn't compassion. It was suspicion. But not everyone saw it that way. The elderly woman, her name was Margaret Whitmore, a retired schoolteacher, stood frozen on that corner, still clutching the feeling of Calter's steady hand. Memories flooded her. She had grown up in the South during segregation, where black boys like Calter weren't allowed near white women without whispers, accusations, or worse. She had been raised in that world. She remembered her father's voice, strict and sharp, telling her who she could trust and who she couldn't. But here she was, decades later, an old woman ignored by her own kind, and the only hand that reached for her was black. Her chest tightened, tears pooling in her tired eyes. Something about the moment cracked the walls she had carried her whole life. Meanwhile, Calter reached his neighborhood. His house was a cramped apartment with peeling paint, where his mother, Denise, worked double shifts at the hospital. His little sister sat at the kitchen table, coloring with broken crayons. Calter rarely spoke about kindness. For him, it wasn't about words. It was about survival. He knew what it felt like to be overlooked, dismissed, and judged because of his skin. Helping Margaret wasn't a choice. It was instinct. Still, he didn't know his simple act would echo far beyond that crosswalk. Unbeknownst to Calter, someone in the crowd had recorded the moment on their phone. They had expected trouble, but what they captured instead was dignity, protection, and quiet strength. By evening, the video had spread on social media. The caption read, "When everyone walked past, he stopped." Thousands shared it. Some praised Calter. Others revealed their biases. Bet it was staged. Hope she didn't lose her wallet after. See? Not all of them are bad. That last comment stung most of all. The idea that kindness was the exception for black youth, not the truth. But the video also reached someone unexpected. Margaret sat in her living room that night, the TV flickering as the same clip played again and again. Reporters called Calter the mystery teen. Strangers debated his intentions from behind their screens. Margaret's heart ached. She knew the truth. She had felt it in his hand, the honesty, the gentleness. She couldn't stay silent. She picked up her phone with trembling hands and called the local news station. For the first time in her life, Margaret stood up against the narrative she had once accepted. She told them, "That boy saved me today, and I'll never forget it." Days later, the station arranged for Calter and Margaret to meet again, this time on camera. The two sat side by side, the contrast striking. She was pale, frail, wrinkled with years. He was tall, young, black, with cautious eyes that had seen too much too soon. Reporters asked questions, and Margaret's voice cracked as she described the indifference of the crowd and the way Calter had stopped without hesitation. But when they turned the microphone to Calter, he didn't talk about himself. He talked about what it felt like to be judged, to have people clutch their bags when he walked by, to be seen as a threat before a person. The room grew quiet. Margaret reached over and squeezed his hand. And for the first time, the world saw not just a viral video, but two lives crossing in defiance of prejudice. Not everyone celebrated. Online, the comments grew uglier. Old woman probably tricked. Good PR stunt for that kid. You can't change what they are. The racism was raw, ugly, and loud. But something else happened too. Many began to defend Calter, calling out the hatred, challenging the lies. Some even shared their own stories of being helped, supported, or lifted by someone society had dismissed. The story had become bigger than Calter and Margaret. It was about every ignored kindness, every overlooked moment of humanity, every assumption poisoned by racism. Late one night, Margaret sat awake in her rocking chair. The house was quiet, but her heart raced. Ever since the video went viral, her conscience gnawed at her. She thought about her past, about her family name, Whitmore, a name tied to old money, old land, and old sins. She had lived comfortably while others suffered. She had looked the other way when her family's choices hurt black neighbors. Her father used to brag at the dinner table about how he bought out black families' farms for pennies during hard times. Land that wasn't his to take. Land stolen under the cover of contracts and intimidation. Margaret realized now. Her comfort had been built on someone else's suffering. And as fate would have it, Calter's family name, Johnson, was written in the very records her father once gloated over. Margaret pulled out a dusty box from her attic. Inside were old deeds, letters, and ledgers. Her wrinkled fingers trembled as she flipped through them. One paper stopped her cold. The Johnson farm, seized during the 1960s. A fertile stretch of land her father had taken after manipulating Calter's grandfather with debt and lies. Her chest tightened. This wasn't just history. This was personal. Calter wasn't just the boy who had helped her. He was the descendant of a family her own bloodline had wronged. Tears blurred her vision. She whispered to herself, "Lord, maybe you sent him to me, to make it right." Margaret requested another meeting with Calter and his mother, Denise. They arrived cautiously at her home, unsure why the old woman wanted to see them again. The living room was heavy with silence as Margaret placed the box of documents on the table. Her voice shook as she explained the truth. "My family, we weren't kind. We took what didn't belong to us. Your family's land. It was stolen piece by piece, and I've carried the guilt for years, never knowing how to make it right. Then Calter, you showed me mercy when no one else would, and I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore." Denise's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. Calter sat frozen, the weight of her words pressing down like stone. Margaret had already taken steps. With her lawyer, she arranged to return the land, or what was left of its worth, to Calter's family. The deeds were signed, trusts established. What had been stolen generations ago would now be restored. The Johnsons stared in disbelief. For a family that had lived paycheck to paycheck, this wasn't just property. It was dignity, it was justice, decades overdue. Margaret's frail hand reached across the table, covering Calter's. "You gave me kindness when the world turned its back. Let me give back what was taken from yours." When the news broke, the town was shaken. Some praised Margaret for her courage. Others condemned her, calling her a traitor to her own kind. Old neighbors muttered that she was ruining her family's legacy. But others, especially black families who had endured the same injustices, saw her act as a turning point. For once, history wasn't being buried. It was being corrected. One evening, Calter stood on the edge of the land that now belonged to his family again. The sun dipped low, painting the fields gold. He thought of his grandfather, who had once dreamed of building a future on this very soil, but was robbed of the chance. He thought of his mother, who had worked herself to exhaustion to keep them afloat. And he thought of Margaret, an old woman who had finally chosen truth over silence. For the first time in his young life, Calter felt the weight of justice and the hope of possibility. The world had wanted to paint Calter as a stereotype, just another black teen up to no good. But his simple act of kindness unraveled a story much bigger than himself. It revealed stolen histories. It forced reckonings. And it proved that sometimes the smallest gestures can ignite the biggest changes. Because when everyone else walked past an old woman on the street, Jamal stopped. And that one act didn't just help her cross the road, it helped her cross decades of silence, shame, and injustice. In the end, kindness became the bridge between past wrongs and future hope.